Executive Outcomes was a private military company founded in South Africa by former Lieutenant Colonel of the South African Defence Force Eeben Barlow in 1989. It later became part of the South African-based holding company Strategic Resource Corporation. History Mission statement Executive Outcomes mission statement was described by the company as to provide a highly professional and confidential military advisory service to legitimate governments, to provide sound military and strategic advice, to provide the most professional military training packages currently available to armed forces, covering aspects related to sea, air, and land warfare, to provide advice to armed forces on weapon and weapon platform selection, to provide a total apolitical service based on confidentiality, professionalism, and dedication. Background In 1989, following the conclusion of South African border wars in Angola and Namibia, the apartheid regime in South Africa was beginning to dissolve. The South African Defence Force was looking at broad cuts in its personnel. African National Congress leader Nelson Mandela demanded that then South African President Frederick Willem de Klerk dismantle some of the South African and Southwest African Special Forces units such as 32 Battalion and Covowit. One of these was the Civil Cooperation Bureau, a unit that carried out covert operations which included assassinations of government opponents, and worked to bypass the United Nations apartheid sanctions by setting up overseas front companies. Only Covowit being part of the Southwest African Police was disbanded as part of independence negotiations for Southwest Africa. Many members of the other units, or simply former national servicemen, were recruited by Executive Outcomes. Formation Eeben Barlow and Michael Mullen, an Irishman from Dublin, formerly in charge of the Western European section of the CCB, established Executive Outcomes in 1989. Its aim was to provide specialized cover training to Special Forces members. Barlow was also awarded a contract by Botswana to train a selected group of security officers to infiltrate and penetrate the illegal diamond dealing syndicates in Botswana. When Botswana discovered EO was training the Angolan armed forces, it promptly cancelled EO's contract. Many of Barlow's Special Forces students would later join him at EO after he started recruiting men to assist with the training of the Angolan forces, says Walter Hallecky, one of Eben's associates in the FAA. The company also went on to recruit many of its personnel from the unit's president F.W. de Klerk disbanded. At its peak, EO employed about 2,000 former soldiers. Barlow registered Executive Outcomes Limited in the UK on the insistence of the South African Reserve Bank. There is some confusion over this issue as a top-secret British intelligence report states that OE Executive Outcomes was registered in the UK on September 1993 by Anthony Buckingham, a British businessman, and Simon Mann, a former British official. Buckingham denies that he registered EO in London and consistently denies any corporate ties to EO. Key personnel Apart from founder Eeben Barlow, other senior EO personnel were Lafras Lewitting and Nick van der Berg. Senior associates included Simon Mann and Tony Buckingham, who, along with Barlow and Lewitting, were the executive officers of Ibisair, the aircraft procurement organization for Executive Outcomes, which was essentially their private air force. Pilot Crossdale was the South African-based director of Ibisair. Activities Executive Outcomes initially trained and later fought on behalf of the Angolan government against UNITA after UNITA refused to accept the election results in 1992. This contract was awarded to the company after EO had assisted Ranger Oil with an equipment recovery operation in the harbour town of Soyo. Dubbed by the South African media as an attempt to assassinate the rebel leader Dr. Jonas Savimbi, EO found itself under constant UNITA attacks where it lost 3 of its men. This action saw EO as being recognized by the FAA and a contract to train its forces was duly awarded. In a short space of time, UNITA was defeated on the battlefield and sued for peace. The Angolan government, under pressure from the UN and the USA, were forced to terminate EO's contract. EO was replaced by the UN's peacekeeping force known as UNAVIM. Angola returned to war shortly thereafter. In March 1995, the company contained an insurrection of guerrillas known as the Revolutionary United Front in Sierra Leone, regained control of the diamond fields, and forced a negotiated peace. In both these instances they are credited with rescuing both governments against AUF and UNITA. In the case of Angola this led to a ceasefire and the Lusaka Protocol, which ended the Angolan civil war albeit only for a few years. In Sierra Leone, however, the government capitulated to international pressure to withdraw in favor of an ineffective peacekeeping force, allowing the AUF to rebuild and sack the capital in Operation No Living Thing. As is characteristic of one of the first private military companies, Executive Outcomes was directly involved militarily in Angola and Sierra Leone. The company was notable in its ability to provide all aspects of a highly trained modern army to the less professional government forces of Sierra Leone and Angola. For instance, in Sierra Leone, Executive Outcomes fielded not only professional fighting men, but armor and support aircraft such as two Mi-24 Hind and two Mi-8 helicopters, the BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle and T-72 main battle tank. It also possessed medevac capabilities to airlift the wounded out of combat zones via Boeing 727 aircraft. These were bought from sources in the worldwide arms trade within Africa as well as Eastern Europe. The aircraft were owned and operated by a separate partner company called Eeben, which also owned MiG-23 Flogger fighters and a squadron of Swiss-made fixed-wing turboprop trainers converted for recce and the ground attack role with the capability to fire air-to-ground rockets. Eeben also had the connections to operate MiG-27 Flogger strike aircraft and Su-25 Frogfoot close support aircraft for Rio that were loaned out via the Angolan Air Force. Executive Outcomes had contracts with multinational corporations such as De Beers, Chevron, JFPI Corporation, Rio Tinto Zinc and Texaco. The governments of Angola, Sierra Leone, and Indonesia were also clients. Dissolution. Executive Outcomes actively encouraged the South African government to enforce a regulation of PMCs as several South African and international companies were masquerading for work under the banner of Executive Outcomes. Additionally, Executive Outcomes was actively engaged in providing input into the formulation of the bill which became known as Regulation of Foreign Military Assistance Act in 1998. Executive Outcomes was duly provided with a license stipulating that it met the requirements of the newly introduced Act. Executive Outcomes was dissolved on December 31, 1998. The aim of the Act was to stop mercenary activities by the dual actions of preventing direct participation as a combatant in armed conflict for private gain including the training, recruitment and use of mercenaries, and requiring approval of the National Conventional Arms Control Committee for offering of military assistance overseas. Sandline International. Executive Outcomes was often loosely linked with the United Kingdom private military company Sandline International, but in 1997 Sandline directly subcontracted Executive Outcomes for their operation in Papua New Guinea to oust the rebels holding the Pangua mine on Bougainville Island, which led to the so-called Sandline Affair, when news of the government's intention to hire mercenaries was leaked to the Australian press. The commander of the Papua New Guinea Defence Force, Jerry Sinirok, who reversed his support for the operation, ordered the detaining of all the mercenaries on their arrival, and forced the Prime Minister Sir Julius Chan to resign, with Papua New Guinea coming close to a military coup. Sterling Corporate Services. A UN report from July 2012 criticised the South African security company Sterling Corporate Services for assembling a private army in defiance of international agreements and also of Somalian sanctions. The report was conducted by the UN's Monitoring Group on Somalia and Eritrea and revealed strong links to Executive Outcomes. See also, Private Military Company, UN Mercenary Convention, Unlawful Combatant, Arms Trade, Mercenary, STTEP. References. External links. Mirror of Executive Outcomes official website in 1998, from archive.org, License to Kill, Hired Guns in the War on Terror by Robert Young Pelton, The Hunter, The Hammer, and Heaven, Journeys to Three Worlds Gone Mad, by Robert Young Pelton, Executive Outcomes page by globalsecurity.org, profile, Simon Mann, BBC News, September 10, 2004. War Dog, Fighting Other People's Wars by Al J. Venter. Executive Outcomes, Mercenary Corporation OSINT, Open Source Intelligence Guide by Dr. Robert J. Bunker and Stephen F. Marin.